Elias Moreno had worked in the world of international business for more than 25 years. And during that time, he had seen hundreds of deals, contracts, projects, and negotiations. But nothing in his long career came close to the opportunity in front of him now. This new partnership was valued at $500 million, an amount so large that even he sometimes had to pause and remind himself it was real. What made it even more special was the fact that it had taken almost a year and a half of careful communication, meetings, travel, and planning. Every detail had been handled with care, every step had been measured, and every agreement had been discussed, until both sides felt satisfied. For Elias, it felt like the kind of moment that defined a person's life. He sat in his office that late afternoon, looking over the final draft of the contract. The sun was setting outside his large glass windows, filling the room with a warm golden light. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the kind of quiet excitement that he rarely allowed himself to feel. People often described him as calm and steady, someone who never rushed into things and never showed too much emotion. But now, even he felt the thrill of what was coming. Al Nadir Holdings, the company he was partnering with, was known for its long history and strong reputation. They had built successful businesses across different countries, and their leadership team was respected in the business community. Elias admired the way they operated, structured, disciplined, and forward-thinking. From the beginning, he had believed that this partnership could open doors to new markets and create opportunities for his own company that would last many years. Still, even with all his confidence, he knew that deals of this size always came with pressure. A single misunderstanding or mistake could break everything apart. That was why Elias worked late most nights, reviewing every page and making sure nothing was overlooked. He trusted his team, but he also believed that a leader should never step away during important moments. He carried that responsibility seriously. At home, the atmosphere was completely different. While Elias focused on legal papers and financial models, his home was busy with warm smells from the kitchen and soft chatter. His maid, Rosa, was preparing a small dinner to celebrate the closing stage of the deal. She had worked for the Moreno family for many years, and Elias trusted her like family. She always kept the house running smoothly, especially during times when he was too focused on work to slow down. Rosa wasn't alone that day. Her daughter, Lila, had come with her. Lila often spent time at the Moreno house after school, especially on days when her mother worked long hours. She was a quiet, polite girl, full of curiosity and always eager to learn new things. She respected Elias and never disturbed him when she knew he was busy. But she liked observing the environment in the house. The bookshelves filled with business books, the awards on the walls, and the soft music that sometimes played in the background. That afternoon, as Rosa chopped vegetables and stirred pots, Lila sat at the kitchen counter doing her school assignments. She had a notebook open in front of her with neatly written lines. She didn't mind being there. In fact, she liked the peaceful feeling of the house. It felt different from many other places she visited. Calmer, more organized, yet still warm. "You must be excited," Rosa said to her daughter while preparing the last dish. "Why?" Lila asked, looking up from her notebook. "Mr. Elias is close to signing a very big deal tomorrow." "A very, very big one." Lila smiled a little. She found it interesting how adults reacted to big financial matters. To her, it wasn't about the money but about how seriously they treated it. She had seen Elias pacing the halls and reading papers with deep concentration. It was clear he cared a lot about this moment. In the dining room, Elias stepped out of his office just as Rosa placed plates on the table. He paused for a second, appreciating how his home brought him a sense of balance. Even on his busiest days, Rosa's presence made everything feel normal and familiar. He thanked her, as he always did, and sat down. While Elias ate, his mind drifted back to the upcoming signing ceremony. It was scheduled for the next morning at a private conference hall. Journalists would be waiting outside, cameras ready to capture the handshake that would confirm the partnership. Representatives from both companies would attend, along with lawyers, advisors, and assistants. Elias wasn't the type who enjoyed the attention of cameras. But he understood that it was part of the business world. He reminded himself that the ceremony wasn't about the photos. It was about celebrating the hard work behind the scenes. When dinner ended, Elias stayed in the living room, reviewing his notes. Rosa cleaned the kitchen quietly, while Lila helped by drying the dishes. The house felt peaceful, with soft lights glowing and a gentle breeze coming in through the open windows. Later that evening, the quiet atmosphere shifted when two guests arrived, representatives from Al Nadir Holdings. They had requested a brief informal visit to discuss a few last-minute details. Elias welcomed them politely and brought them to the sitting area. They spoke with confidence and seemed relaxed, which reassured Elias that everything was progressing smoothly. Rosa entered the room with a tray of tea and small snacks. It was a custom Elias followed when hosting guests, and Rosa had perfected the practice over the years. Lila followed her mother, carrying a smaller tray with cups. She moved carefully, trying not to disturb the conversation. As the guests continued talking, Lila stepped back quietly and stood near the door, watching her mother. She didn't mean to listen, but she could hear the soft rhythm of their speech. Some of the conversation was in English, but soon the two guests shifted into Arabic, a language she had been studying in school for 2 years. She recognized a few words, not enough to understand everything, but enough to notice that the tone sounded different from the calm discussion Elias was having in English moments earlier. One of the representatives spoke quickly and in a slightly tense voice. The other nodded, glancing occasionally toward Elias, who was flipping through papers and not paying attention to their private side conversation. Lila couldn't fully understand what was being said, but the feeling in the room changed for her. It was nothing dramatic, just a small shift she sensed. Because she was naturally observant, for a few moments, she watched with curiosity. Then she turned away and joined her mother again. Rosa didn't notice anything unusual. She was focused on her work. Lila wanted to brush the moment aside, telling herself that adults often spoke in different tones when discussing business, but something about it stayed with her. After the guests left, the house returned to its normal quiet. Elias felt confident and satisfied. Everything appeared in order, and the representatives had assured him that the final steps were simple. He planned to get a good night's sleep so he could be alert and ready for the ceremony. He thanked Rosa for her help and wished Lila good night before heading upstairs. Neither Elias nor Rosa had any idea that the small moment Lila witnessed, the moment that felt like nothing more than background noise, would soon become the most important piece of the entire story. At that point, she was just a young girl finishing her homework and helping her mother. No one expected her to hold information that could change the course of a $500 million agreement, but that is exactly what fate had prepared. The next morning began quietly, with soft sunlight shining through the curtains of the Moreno house. The world outside was calm, but inside the house, an important day was beginning. Everyone woke up earlier than usual because this was the day Elias was going to sign the deal he had been working on for months. He felt a mixture of excitement and pressure, the kind that sits gently on the shoulders yet can be felt in every breath. Elias moved through his morning routine with focus. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie carefully, making sure he looked calm and confident. He needed to show everyone that he was ready. Even though he felt prepared, he still could not ignore the tiny knots of nervousness in his stomach. A $500 million deal was not something a person took lightly. Downstairs, Rosa had arrived early to prepare breakfast. She wanted Elias to start his day with something warm and comforting. While she cooked, Lila sat at the kitchen counter eating toast, her notebook open again. She kept glancing toward the living room, remembering the conversation she had overheard the night before. She didn't fully understand it, but it had stayed in her mind longer than she expected. When Elias came downstairs, he greeted both of them politely. Rosa served him breakfast, and he thanked her with his usual gentle smile. Lila looked at him for a moment, wondering whether she should mention what she had heard, but the thought disappeared quickly. She wasn't even sure she understood it correctly, and she didn't want to interrupt such an important morning with something she couldn't explain clearly. After finishing breakfast, Elias left for a final pre-meeting conference call at his office. Once the door closed behind him, the house fell into its usual quiet rhythm. Rosa cleaned the kitchen, while Lila packed her books and prepared to leave for school. But before she left, she opened her notebook again. On the last page, she had written a few Arabic words she had recognized from the night before. She whispered them softly to herself, testing whether she remembered them correctly. The tone of the conversation had been serious, and even though she understood only a small part, she felt something unusual about it. But she didn't know how to describe that feeling to anyone, so she kept the words written safely in her notebook. Later that afternoon, the house grew busy again. 2 representatives from Al Nadir Holdings were expected to visit Elias once more, this time for a short, informal review before the official signing. Rosa had been asked to prepare tea and set the sitting room in order. Leela, who had returned home early from school because of a half-day, stayed close to her mother and helped her arrange the room. As they worked, Lila felt a sense of curiosity mixed with caution. She kept remembering the way the men had spoken the night before. Not the words themselves, but the tone. Fast, slightly tense, as if they were worried about something. She tried to push the thought aside because she didn't want to imagine something wrong. She knew how much this deal meant to Elias. By early evening, the house was fully prepared. The table in the sitting room was set with clean cups, a polished teapot, and a plate of small snacks. Everything looked neat and welcoming. Rosa quickly checked every detail, wanting everything to be perfect. When the doorbell finally rang, Lila felt her heart jump a little. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt more alert. Rosa went to open the door, and Lila followed her. The 2 representatives stepped inside with polite smiles. They were the same men who had visited the night before. They greeted Rosa kindly, as they always did, and walked toward the sitting room. Elias arrived moments later, shaking hands with them warmly. He offered them seats and began speaking with his usual calm confidence. Rosa brought the trays in, and Leela followed, carefully placing the cups on the table. As she set them down, she heard the men shift their conversation from English to Arabic again. This time, the change happened more quickly. Almost like they were eager to speak in private. Elias didn't join that part of the conversation. He was busy reviewing some notes. Lila didn't want to listen, but she couldn't help hearing some of the words. Her ears recognized several familiar phrases, the same ones from the night before. She heard mentions of timing, transfer, and something that sounded like change before agreement. She noticed one of the men glance briefly at Elias, before continuing quietly in Arabic. Lila's attention sharpened. She didn't understand every sentence, but the pieces she did understand didn't match the friendly tone they used in English. She stood near the corner of the room, pretending to straighten the napkins on the tray, but in truth, she was concentrating on the conversation. Her heart beat a little faster. She asked herself whether she was just imagining things, maybe she misheard something, or maybe she translated it wrong. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, especially about something so important. Still, she felt uneasy. From where she stood, she could see the expression on the men's faces. In English, they spoke with assurance and positivity, praising the cooperation between both companies. But when they switched to Arabic, their eyes looked sharper, and their tones seemed more urgent, almost as if they were discussing something hidden from the main conversation. One of the men whispered something that contained the phrase, "after he signs." Lila wasn't sure what came before or after it, but the small part she understood made her throat tighten slightly. She lifted her notebook a little and wrote another word she recognized. She didn't want to forget anything. A few minutes later, the men switched back to English, smiling again, as if nothing serious had been discussed at all. Elias, who hadn't noticed the private tones behind the scenes, continued his discussion confidently. He asked questions, clarified details, and nodded as they answered. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but Lila could not forget what she heard. She left the room quietly and went back to the kitchen where her mother was preparing fresh tea. Rosa noticed her daughter's thoughtful expression. "Everything okay?" Rosa asked gently. "Yes," Lila replied quickly, though her voice held a tiny note of uncertainty. "I'm fine." She didn't want to worry her mother. She also didn't want to sound like she was making something up. She needed time to think, to make sense of the words she had recognized. Later that evening, after the guests left, the house settled into quiet again. Elias felt pleased with how smoothly everything seemed to be moving. He told Rosa that everything was on schedule and that tomorrow morning would be the final step. He looked tired but happy, and it was clear he trusted the process completely. When he went upstairs to rest, Lila stayed in the kitchen with her notebook open. She wrote down every word she remembered hearing in Arabic. She underlined the parts she was certain of and circled the ones she wasn't sure about. Her hands moved quickly, not because she was scared, but because she wanted to be completely accurate. She read the words again and again. The more she looked at them, the more she felt something wasn't right. She didn't want it to be true, but she couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside her. Her mother called her to get ready for bed. Lila slowly closed her notebook, but her thoughts did not settle. She lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the possibility, even if small, that something important was hidden in the conversation she overheard. She didn't know what she would do yet, but she sensed that the words she had heard were not simple, and they were not harmless. And soon, she was going to discover just how important they truly were. That night felt different for Lila. Even though she tried to sleep, her mind kept waking her up. Every time she closed her eyes, the same Arabic phrases replayed in her head like a whisper she couldn't turn off. She wasn't sure if she was remembering them perfectly, but she was certain about the tone the men had used, the quick way they spoke, and the small glances they exchanged while Elias wasn't looking. Those tiny details worried her more than the words themselves. She sat up slowly in her bed, opened her notebook again, and stared at the lines she had written. The handwriting was a little messy because she had written everything in a hurry, but the words were still readable. She touched each one with the tip of her finger, as if the letters themselves could help her understand the situation better. She whispered the Arabic words softly, then translated them into English in her mind. Some translations were clear, like timing, transfer, and after signing. Others were more confusing, but the overall feeling she got from the phrases made her uneasy. They didn't sound like normal business talk. They sounded like someone was preparing something that Elias didn't know about. She wondered if she should ignore it. Adults always said children misunderstood things. Maybe she had misunderstood. Maybe the men were talking about something simple or harmless. Maybe they were just excited or nervous about the signing. But the more she tried to convince herself, the more her heart disagreed. She had always been good at sensing when something felt unusual. Even in school, she noticed small things other people ignored, the way a classmate looked down when pretending to be fine, or the way a teacher paused before explaining something. Her mother often told her she had a quiet kind of awareness that made her different. Tonight, that awareness was louder than ever. The next morning started with the same calm routine as usual, but Lila felt different inside. Elias was dressed early, more formally than usual, preparing for the signing ceremony. He walked downstairs with a sense of purpose, carrying his briefcase and wearing a confident smile. He greeted Rosa with polite warmth and thanked her again for helping everything run smoothly the last few days. Lila stood by the kitchen door, watching him with mixed feelings. She respected him a lot, even admired him, and she didn't want to worry him for no reason. She struggled inside, should she say something or stay quiet? She still wasn't fully sure about the meaning of what she heard, and she didn't want to risk making a mistake. As Elias ate a quick breakfast, his phone buzzed several times with messages from his team. They wanted to confirm final details, double-check arrival times, and make sure everything was ready. Elias handled everything calmly. He was the type of person who did not get shaken easily, but what Lila saw was something different. She saw trust. She saw a man who believed completely that everything was in place. He had no idea that someone in his own house had heard something unusual, something that could change the direction of the entire deal. After breakfast, Elias left for the conference center. The signing would happen in a few hours. Rosa wished him good luck, and Lila gave him a small smile, though inside she felt a strange heaviness, as if she was running out of time. Once the house was quiet again, Rosa began cleaning while Lila sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open. She stared at the words for a long time, hoping they would somehow make perfect sense. But instead, something else happened. She remembered a sentence the taller representative said the night before. She hadn't written it down because she was still learning the words, but she suddenly remembered the phrase more clearly. It had something to do with a hidden structure or changed arrangement. She wasn't perfectly sure, but the memory felt real enough to worry her even more. Her heart tapped loudly in her chest as she realized she might be holding something important, something she couldn't ignore anymore. She opened her tablet, searching for translations of the words she wasn't fully confident about. She typed slowly, carefully, trying different spellings until the results made sense. When she finally got a clear translation, her breath caught slightly. The word she had been unsure about translated into something like secondary ownership or shifted control. Her hands grew still. She looked at the translation again, reading it 2 or 3 times just to be sure. Her mind raced. In business, shifted control sounded like something that could change the entire meaning of a deal. She didn't know the full situation, but she knew one thing clearly. Elias was not aware of this, and the representatives had spoken those words in a tone that suggested privacy, not honesty. She closed the tablet slowly and stared blankly at the countertop. She didn't want to imagine that people could hide something important from someone as kind and hard-working as Elias, but she also knew that people sometimes did things for their own benefit, even if it meant hurting others without using any harsh methods. She remembered the way the men had whispered, the fast way they talked, and how one of them had looked toward Elias before continuing. Those details added a layer of seriousness she could no longer ignore. She took a deep breath. Her mother was still cleaning, humming softly, unaware of the worry growing inside her daughter. Lila didn't know if she should talk to her mother about it. She feared her mother might think she was overthinking, or worse, that she was misunderstanding the language. But at the same time, she knew she couldn't stay silent. She grabbed her notebook and walked to the living room. She sat on the couch and read through the words again. Her mind formed a picture of what the men might have been discussing. Something about a hidden step, something that would happen after signing, something involving a transfer, and something about a secondary structure. Even though she wasn't a business expert, she could guess what that meant. It sounded like there could be a second set of papers or a secret arrangement waiting behind the main agreement, something Elias wasn't supposed to know until it was too late. The thought made her stomach twist slightly. She felt small and young, unsure if she was reading too much into it. She wished she had someone she could ask for advice. Then she remembered something important. Elias respected honesty. He always listened carefully when people spoke to him. He treated Rosa with trust and treated Lila with kindness. He was not the type of person who would dismiss someone without listening, but the idea of interrupting such an important moment scared her. What if she was wrong? What if she confused similar words? What if she caused unnecessary stress? Still, what if she was right? What if silence allowed something to go terribly wrong in a calm, peaceful way that no one would even notice until it was too late? She sat there for a long time, thinking deeply. Every minute, her worry grew stronger. The words kept echoing in her mind. After signing, transfer, secondary control. Finally, Lila made a decision, a quiet but brave one. She decided she would speak to Elias before the ceremony. Not to accuse anyone, not to panic him, but simply to share what she heard and let him decide what to do. She closed the notebook gently and held it close to her chest. She didn't know how he would react. She didn't know what the outcome would be. She only knew one thing for certain. She could not stay silent anymore. As she stood up and walked toward her mother, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her small shoulders, not a heavy, frightening weight, but one that reminded her that doing the right thing was sometimes uncomfortable before it became meaningful. Soon, this simple decision made by a quiet young girl with a notebook and a courageous heart would change everything for Elias, for the deal, and for everyone involved. And she had no idea how big the impact would be. The morning of the signing ceremony arrived with a calm sky and a soft breeze. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside the conference center where the ceremony was being prepared, everything was busy. Assistants walked quickly through the hallways. Cameras were being set up near the entrance, and reporters waited eagerly to capture the moment the two companies completed the deal. Elias arrived early, dressed in a dark suit that made him look confident and ready. He carried his briefcase and walked with steady steps, greeting everyone politely. His team followed close behind, checking documents and confirming schedules. The representatives from Al Nadir Holdings were already in one of the meeting rooms, waiting for the final review before the official signing. Everything looked perfect. Everything looked safe. But at that same moment, far from the conference center, a different kind of tension was building inside the Moreno house. Lila stood near the door with her notebook in her hands, breathing slowly and trying to keep her courage steady. She had thought about this moment all night, and again all morning. She knew she had to speak to Elias before he signed anything. She felt nervous, small, and unsure. But something deep inside her reminded her that staying quiet was not an option. Rosa noticed her daughter's expression and touched her shoulder gently. "You look thoughtful. Is something on your mind?" Lila hesitated, then whispered, "I need to talk to Mr. Elias before he signs the papers." Rosa looked surprised. "About what, dear?" Lila swallowed softly. "About something I heard." Something in Arabic. Rosa's eyes widened, but she didn't scold her or tell her she was mistaken. She knew her daughter well. She knew Lila didn't speak without reason. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked softly. Lila nodded. A few minutes later, they were in a car heading toward the conference center. Lila sat quietly, holding her notebook tightly, rehearsing in her mind what she would say. She didn't want to cause trouble, but she also didn't want Elias to walk into something without knowing the truth. When they reached the large glass building, Rosa told the receptionist they needed to speak to Mr. Elias urgently. At first, the staff looked confused. After all, this was an important day, and interruptions were unusual. But when Rosa explained gently and firmly that it was about the deal, the staff decided it was better to inform Elias. Elias was reviewing the last set of documents when his assistant entered and whispered that Rosa and her daughter were waiting outside. He looked surprised. It wasn't normal for them to come to the office, especially on such a busy morning. Concerned that something might be wrong at home, he stepped out immediately. When he saw Lila and Rosa, he walked toward them with a kind but slightly anxious expression. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. Rosa stepped back a little and looked at Lila, giving her the space to speak. For a moment, Lila froze. The words in her notebook felt heavier than they had ever felt before. She looked up into Elias's eyes and saw trust, the same trust he had always shown her and her mother. That gave her the courage she needed. "Mr. Elias," she began, her voice thin but steady, "I think you should look at something before you sign the papers." Elias listened carefully, his eyebrows lowering slightly in concern, but not impatience. "What is it?" "Lila?" She opened her notebook with shaking hands and showed him the Arabic words she had written. She explained how she had overheard the representatives speaking the night before and the evening before that. She told him how she had recognized some words and had translated others using her tablet. She spoke slowly, making sure he understood that she wasn't accusing anyone, she was simply sharing what she heard. Rosa watched her daughter with pride and worry at the same time. Elias read the notebook silently. His face didn't show anger or suspicion, but it did show something important: deep thinking. His eyes moved over the phrases again and again. "After signing, timing, transfer, secondary control," he read, in a quiet voice. Then he looked at Lila and said softly, "Are you sure these are the correct words?" Lila nodded. "I triple-checked them." He could see the seriousness in her eyes. She wasn't confused. She wasn't guessing. She was doing her best to help him. "Thank you," he said gently. "You did the right thing." He turned to his assistant and said calmly but firmly, "Get the legal team now. Tell them to review everything with a focus on ownership structures and hidden transfers." Within minutes, lawyers rushed into a nearby meeting room with their laptops and documents. Elias handed them the notebook and explained what Lila had heard. The team began checking through the contract, line by line, comparing details, reviewing clauses they had previously considered safe. At first, everything looked normal, but then, one of the lawyers paused. He zoomed in on a small section of the contract, a sentence that seemed ordinary at first, but connected to a secondary attachment no one had noticed before. It referenced a small clause that redirected certain rights to a subsidiary company, a company the legal team had never fully looked into because the clause blended naturally into the larger text. Another lawyer quickly pulled up information on the subsidiary. The more they looked, the more unusual it seemed. It had limited data, unclear ownership, and connections that did not match the main agreement. One lawyer glanced up and said, "This could change the entire deal." Another added, "It might have transferred control after signing." Elias felt his heart grow heavy. He wasn't angry, he was shocked. He had trusted the process, trusted the partnership. But trust alone wasn't enough in business. Facts mattered. Transparency mattered, and something here was not transparent at all. He looked at Lila again. She stood quietly next to her mother, unsure whether she had done something huge or something small. She didn't know whether she had saved a deal or broken one. She only knew that she had spoken the truth. Elias approached her slowly and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lila," he said softly, "you have helped me more than you know." "Oh." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't know what to say. He continued, "If you hadn't shared what you heard, I would have signed something that wasn't what it appeared to be." Her mother wiped her eyes quietly, moved by the moment. Within half an hour, Elias gathered his team and walked purposefully toward the conference room where the representatives were waiting. The cameras outside were ready. The ceremony room was set. Everyone expected the signing to happen any moment, but the signing never happened. Elias entered the room with complete calm. He sat across from the representatives and placed the contract on the table. The men smiled politely, unaware that anything had changed. Before they could speak, Elias said, "We need to discuss a clause in your documents." The representatives exchanged confused looks, then slightly tense ones. They hadn't expected any questions at this stage. Elias continued, "I want to understand the purpose of the transfer referenced in this section." He pointed directly at the clause the lawyers had found. One representative's smile faded. The other shifted in his seat. Elias watched their expressions closely. His voice remained calm and respectful. He didn't accuse them. He didn't raise his tone. He simply asked for clarity, but the silence that followed said more than any answer they could have given. Minutes later, Elias stood up, closed his briefcase, and politely ended the meeting. The deal was over. He shook hands respectfully because professionalism mattered, and walked out of the room with dignity, strength, and a surprising sense of peace. In the hallway, he saw Rosa and Lila waiting. His smile this time was genuine, not the smile of a businessman, but the smile of a human being, grateful for the honesty of someone unexpected. "Because of you," he told Lila, "I was saved from a very big problem." Lila's eyes softened with relief. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. And the world would soon learn that the smallest voice in the room had protected the biggest deal of Elias's career. When Elias walked out of the conference room that day, something inside him felt strangely calm. The deal he had spent almost 2 years working on had just collapsed, yet he didn't feel regret or disappointment. Instead, he felt grateful that he had discovered the truth at the right moment, grateful for the people around him, and most of all, grateful for the young girl who had quietly changed everything. His team followed him out of the building, whispering among themselves, unsure of what would happen next. Reporters waiting outside noticed the unexpected change in atmosphere. They had been prepared to photograph a handshake and a celebration. Instead, they saw Elias walking out early, expression steady but serious, with no signing ceremony behind him. Some journalists tried to ask questions, but Elias simply smiled politely and said, "There has been a change in plans. Thank you." Then he walked past the cameras and toward the car where Rosa and Lila waited. When Lila saw him approach, she felt her breath catch in her chest. She didn't know if she had helped or caused trouble. She didn't know what he would say or how he would feel, but the moment he opened the car door, his smile told her everything. "Thank you, Lila," he said in a warm, sincere voice. You saved me from a very serious mistake." Rosa gently placed her hand on her daughter's back, her eyes filled with pride and relief. Lila felt lighter the moment she heard his words. She hadn't fully understood the size of what she had done until now, but she felt happy that she had listened to her heart. As the car drove home, Elias explained in simple words how the clause Lila noticed would have changed everything. He told her that business deals should always be honest and clear, and any hidden detail, even a quiet one, could create big problems. Lila listened carefully. She didn't want praise. She just wanted to understand. She was surprised at how grateful he sounded. When they reached the Moreno house, Elias invited Rosa and Lila inside, instead of letting them go home immediately. He wanted to sit down, breathe, and reflect on the strange day he had experienced. He also wanted to properly thank Lila in a calm environment, away from cameras and noise. They sat together in the living room. The sunlight fell softly on the furniture, and everything felt peaceful, far different from the tense conference center. Rosa brought tea for everyone, and they talked for a while. Elias explained how deals worked, how small details mattered, and how important it was to stay aware and observant, just like Lila had been. After a few minutes, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Lila, do you know how many adults in the world ignore their instincts? How many people stay quiet even when something feels wrong?" She shook her head slowly. "Most people," he said with a gentle smile. "But you didn't. You spoke up. You were brave. And you protected something very important." Lila looked down shyly, her fingers holding the edge of her notebook. "You didn't just help me," he continued. "You helped everyone who works for my company. You helped protect their future too." The room became quiet for a moment as the meaning sank in. Later that evening, after Rosa and Lila went home, Elias sat in his office thinking deeply about everything that had happened. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how lucky he had been. If Lila had ignored her instincts, he would have signed a deal with hidden terms, and once signed, the consequences would have taken years to fix. He made an important decision that night. He would not hide this story. He would share it, not the private details of the deal, but the truth about how a young girl's honesty had protected him. People often believed that wisdom only came from adults, but today proved that sometimes wisdom came from unexpected places. The next day, he called a press conference. When reporters gathered, he stepped to the microphone calmly. Everyone expected him to talk about the failed deal. Instead, he talked about honesty, clarity, and the importance of listening. Then he said something no one expected. "I want to thank someone very special. A young girl who noticed something I didn't. And if you know." Then he said something I didn't. The room grew silent. Reporters leaned forward, cameras focused. "She helped me see something important before it was too late," he continued. "Her name is Lila, and her courage saved us from a serious mistake." By afternoon, the story had spread everywhere. News articles appeared with titles like, "Young Girl Prevents Major Business Misstep," and "Quiet Hero Changes Outcome of $500M Deal." Many people admired Elias for giving credit to someone so young, and even more people admired Lila for speaking up. The days that followed were filled with unexpected events. People reached out, wanting to help Lila. Schools sent messages offering scholarships. Language programs invited her to join advanced classes. Organizations praised her for her honesty and bravery. Her small notebook had suddenly changed her life in the most unbelievable way. Rosa felt overwhelmed by the attention but incredibly proud. She had always known her daughter was special, but she had never imagined that quiet curiosity and kindness would one day protect a major business decision. One evening, Elias visited their home with a small envelope. Inside, it was a scholarship certificate for a well-respected educational program focused on international languages and cultural studies. "I want her to continue learning," he explained. "She has a gift, and the world needs people who can understand, listen, and speak with honesty." Lila could hardly believe what she was holding. Her dream of studying languages suddenly felt possible in ways she had never imagined. From that day forward, Lila began to see herself differently. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was someone who had made a difference. Someone who had protected others. Someone whose voice mattered. As time passed, the failed deal became a story people spoke about often, not because of the money, not because of the companies involved, but because of the moment one girl listened closely and cared enough to share what she heard. Elias continued running his business with a deeper understanding of trust and awareness. He became known as a leader who valued honesty over profit, transparency over speed, and courage over silence. He never forgot the lesson Lila taught him, that important warnings sometimes come from the quietest voices. And Lila? She carried her notebook everywhere she went. Not because she needed it for translations anymore, but because it reminded her of the day she chose courage over fear. She continued studying languages, discovering a world of new words and meanings, and planning someday to work in a field where communication mattered deeply. Her life changed not because she was lucky, but because she was brave enough to speak when it mattered most. And though the $500 million deal disappeared, something far more valuable took its place, a truth uncovered at the perfect moment by the most unexpected hero. Lila never asked for recognition, but the world remembered her story anyway. A quiet girl who listened, a simple notebook, a choice made with honesty, and the future opened wide before her.